The MFX4 system for a world in motion. Data acquisition and automation technology for the handling of mineral oils. This video describes the configuration of a MFX4 controller using the MFX4 Explorer and the first setup wizard. A MFX4 controller has to control a truck loading line with additional additive injection. For this, all necessary input and output signals of the controller must be configured. With the wizard function, all necessary settings are made. To call up the setup program, a connection to the MFX4 controller is established. In order to have access to all required parameters, it is necessary that the calibration switch on the controller has been actuated. This is indicated by the status Access Calibration. To invoke the setup program, I right-click on the controller name and select First Setup Wizard from the menu. If the calibration switch has not been activated on the controller, an error message appears. If the calibration switch is active, the wizard is then displayed. On the first page of the wizard, general settings for the MFX4 controller are made. An identification number can be assigned. For a single controller, I choose 1 arm, for a dual controller 2 arm. I set the units for temperature and density and specify the accuracy of the transmitted quantity data. I decide whether the controller should send its loading data to a UPC. I call the next page with Next. If the loading line of this controller is part of a product blending, then I need to provide further details about this blending. I activate the blending function. I select which controllers control the other products of the blending. I specify the type of the blending system. I call the next page with Next. Settings are also required for the product to be loaded. Specify a product name. For the product counter, it must be selected whether it supplies volume or mass pulses. The meter calibration factor indicates the measuring accuracy of the meter. Specify whether a volume conversion to reference temperature is required. Specify the product class required for this. Enter the density of the product and the reference temperature. I call the next page with Next. The desired loading flow for the plant is defined on the flow page. The size of the start stage with reduced flow is specified. The main loading flow is set. The size of the final phase with again reduced flow is entered. At last, the type of the control valve is to be selected. I call the next page again with Next. On this page, you define the configuration of the available additives. Select whether the additive is controlled via a digitally or analog controlled valve. Enter the pulse type, volume or mass of the additive counter. The meter calibration factor indicates the measuring resolution of the meter. If the additive system is to be flushed at the end of loading, enter the residual product quantity here. Activate the additives to be controlled or the die. Enter the blending rates of the additives or the die. I call the next page with next. On this overview, the used digital and analog outputs are set. These are the relays used to control the product valve, or the analog output used to control an analog control valve. The relay used to control the additive control valve, or the analog output used for the control of an analog control valve. The relays used to enable the additive lines. Other relay outputs for general status signals. Next calls the next page. The digital control signals used are set on this overview. These are the optional input for a flow detector for product inking, various inputs for loading control, such as start, stop, or reset. The priority and function of the release signals are determined, and the inputs used for this are also defined. With Save as Template, I can save all settings in a file and reuse them later. With Load to Device, I transfer the settings to the MFX4 controller. The controller settings can be saved to a template file and reloaded later in the wizard. To save, I press Save as Template and specify a file name and location. Save now saves the settings to a file. To load saved template data into the wizard, I open the Use Template field and select a file. The arrow icon loads the saved data into the wizard. After all settings have been made, they can be transferred to the controller by calling Load to Device and confirming the request. Now first a default parameter set is transferred to the controller and then the settings from the wizard. After the transfer, the parameters are permanently stored on the controller and the controller is restarted. Finally, a success message appears and the controller setting is completed. Do you have questions about our devices or our service? Please feel free to contact us.